First story is The Sculptor of Endings. On the edge of known space, the Ethelgard drifted, a research vessel studying a celestial corpse, the Shrouded Star. It wasn't dead, but dying in reverse, collapsing into perfect, timeless narrative stasis. It emitted the lament, a signal that wasn't light or sound, but compressed story. The tragic, beautiful tale of a star that froze its own death into art. Dr. Eris Thorne, the narrative ontologist, had listened for 3 years. He was the universe's expert on a tale that broke his heart. His job was to analyze its structure, to understand the physics of a story so complete it bent local reality. The lament was flawless. A hero's journey, a love lost, a sacrifice, a masterpiece, and he hated it. He discovered the terrible truth. The lament wasn't a recording. It was a script. The star was enforcing its story. Any consciousness that came too close would find their own narrative rewritten. Lost loves, doomed heroism. A beautiful trap. Eris had felt its pull. His own memories reshaped themselves. He fought it with data, logic, mental firewalls. He was losing. The crisis came. The engineer, Kira, tried to make the core sing back to the star. It would have vaporized them all beautifully. Ari stopped her just in time. He used a narrative dampener, a blast of pure, randomized noise. It broke the story's hold. He realized he couldn't just defend. He had to attack the story itself. He had to write a new ending for the Shrouded Star. But you couldn't fight a story with facts. You had to fight it with a better story. Or better yet, with no story at all. He erased the elegant analysis from his screens and pulled raw chaos from the archives. A child's unfinished doodle. A folk song with no moral. A diary entry about a boring Tuesday. The tiny, unresolved, pointless moments that made up a real life. He wove them together and broadcast not a tale, but a collage. Messy, contradictory, human. He aimed it at the star's core. At first, nothing. The lament continued, majestic and unchanging. Then, a stutter. A single perfect chord faltered, replaced by a half-second of static that sounded like a laugh. The pristine structure had no defense against lived experience. The tragic love story warped. It acquired a coda where the lovers simply grew old and bored together. The hero's sacrifice was followed by an administrative inquiry about paperwork and pensions. Aris watched with an artist's hope. He wasn't killing the story, he was reminding it of the middle. The crew stabilized. The pilot flew competently, not dramatically. The botanist saw plants as plants. The oppressive tragedy lifted, replaced by the ordinary weight of being, of an unwritten future. The lament didn't stop. It evolved. Woven into its chords were new motifs, a snippet of a cooking show, the pattern of rust on metal, the quiet comfort of shared silence. The star was learning how to listen, and in listening, it learned how to be imperfect, how to be unfinished, how to be alive again. Aris shut down the broadcast. His work was done. The star felt less like a tomb, more like a library. He hadn't given it a better ending. He had given it the courage to leave the ending unwritten. The Ethelgard turned toward home, its crew free to live messy, unresolved lives. And from the star, a new signal followed them. Not a lament, a question hanging softly in the dark.
Second story, the memory cedar. It rained on the day they told Atlas he was empty. Not water, but a fine rust-colored dust. The diagnostic screen's sterile glow was a cold sun in the clinic's dim room. Anomalous neural architecture, the medtech had said. No engrammatic residue, no inherited memory lines. In simpler terms, Atlas was a blank, a man with a past but no history, a soul without an anchor. On a world where identity was a tapestry woven from ancestors, he was a tear in the fabric. His quarters were a standard-issue cube, the only personal artifact a single unmarked seed pod. It was cool and smooth, a strange organic marble. Others lived in a constant hum of inherited experience, the taste of Earth's oceans, the scent of pine forests. Atlas lived in silence. His work was methodical, a series of equations. But logic couldn't fill the hollow behind his ribs. The discovery was an accident, A seismic survey flagged an impossible organic signature kilometers below. Using outdated maintenance tunnels, he descended alone. The air grew thick and cold. His suit lights cut through, illuminating not rock but the gnarled fossilized roots of a tree of impossible scale. And at its heart, a pulsing bioluminescent core. It was a world seed, a precursor vessel designed to store lived essence. This one was dormant, damaged. Its light flickered weakly. Atlas, without thinking, placed his seed pod against it. A synaptic bridge flared to life. He was offered one sensation: true sunlight warming the skin of a being who had never known it. It was a gift, not an imprint. And in that moment, Atlas understood his emptiness. He was not a vessel to be filled, but a channel. He began returning every cycle. The world seed shared sensations. The crushing pressure of a deep ocean current, the electric thrill of a predator's chase, the profound growth of a mountain range over millennia. He did not inherit these experiences. He witnessed them. The hollow in his chest began to resonate with anticipation. He was not remembering. He was learning to feel. Above, the station's council made its decision. The signature was a liability. Protocol demanded sterilization. Atlas monitored the comms, the cold orders to dispatch a demolition team. They would burn the seed, incinerate a library of lived worlds. The thought brought a devastating grief for the loss itself. He knew what the hollow had been preparing him for. Not to receive, but to protect. He went to the seed one final time. As the demolition team breached the upper tunnels, he placed his hands on the ancient bark. He didn't ask for memories. He offered it his own. 6 months of silent observation, the feel of rust dust, the weight of loneliness, the clarity of equations. His brief, fragile, self-made history. The seed's light pulsed, accepting the humble gift. Then, it showed him one final thing. A fractal blueprint for dispersion. When the charges detonated, the seed did not resist. It dissolved into a cloud of luminous spores, a billion fragments of lived experience riding the geothermal vents. Atlas stood in the storm of light, feeling the spores pass through him, leaving traces of ancient rains on his blank slate. They streamed into the sky. They would settle across the station, the planet, becoming part of the dust, the water, the air. The people would breathe them in and in their dreams feel the ghost of an ocean they'd never seen. The demolition team found him in the empty cavern, covered in sparkling dust. They saw a man who had failed to save a relic. They did not see the librarian who had opened the doors. Atlas returned to the surface. The rust dust still fell, but now it carried a faint, silvered glimmer. He looked out at the terraforming domes, the struggling crops, the people. He was still a blank. But he was no longer empty. He was a fertile field, waiting. And somewhere in the sterile soil of Persephone, a new seed, born of sacrifice and a shared sun, began to stir.
Third story, atmospheric memory. Ava's world was not defined by landscapes but by atmospheres. She was a climate weaver on a remote outpost. She composed a weather, gentle rains for farms, soft breezes for the domes, holding back eternal storms. Her art was balance, silent, invisible care. Her only company was the sigh of processors and projected memories. These sky memories were her solace, a museum of a dead world, until the station's core memory bank failed. Catastrophic corruption. The recipe for Cirrus Station's delicate artificial climate was being erased bit by bit. The central AI barometer delivered the prognosis. Total atmospheric collapse in 48 hours, then suffocation. But there was a fragmented tertiary backup. Not in a server, it was neural, in the mind of the first head climate weaver. Ava's mentor, Kalen. He had synced his senses to the station for decades. His memories held the lost climate patterns. Kalen was gone. But on his deathbed, he performed a forbidden procedure, a direct memory transfer to his only apprentice. Ava had buried those memories. They were too intense, too painful. a storm of another man's life in her skull. To save the station, she would have to dive into Kalen's archived mind, to become him temporarily, to remember the weather. The link established. It was not like watching a recording. It was a full sensory immersion. She was Kalen. She felt his arthritis in the controls, his fondness for a particular chair's squeak, his deep worry about the failing scrubbers. She surfed through years of his life, not major events, but mundane moments, the feel of a perfect humidity level achieved. She felt his grief when Earth finally went silent, not as news, but as a permanent shift in the background psychic static. And she felt his love for her, as his student, a fierce, protective pride, the memory of her first perfect rainfall composition. This was not a data archive. It was a soul. And retrieving the climate patterns meant navigating his entire emotional life. The first pattern she extracted was Dawn Mist, Sector 7. It came bundled with Kalen's memory of his daughter's birth. She fed the pattern to Barometer. The climate stabilized. One dome saved. But the cost was emotional vertigo. She had to continue. Dozens of patterns were needed, each a dive into another facet of her mentor's heart and mind. The next was a high-pressure comm for the main reactors. It was stored within a memory of Kalen's greatest failure. Ava had to relive his shame, his terror, to find the precise sequence of commands that finally brought stability. She fed the sequence to Barometer. The reactors hummed peacefully. Another victory stained with another man's remembered fear. The process was changing her. Kalen's memories were integrating. She'd glance at a chair and miss a wife she never had. She was becoming a blend. Ava plus the ghost of Kalen. The station needed the blend to survive. But who would she be after? The final and most complex pattern was the planetary storm buffer. It was locked in Kalen's deepest, most private moment. To access it, Ava had to experience not a memory of work, but of surrender. The moment Kalen accepted his own death. In that moment of peace, his mind had perfectly mapped the station's interaction with the external storms. A final gift. Ava received the gift. And with it, the full weight of Kalen's legacy. Not a burden, but a purpose, fully understood. She fed the final pattern to Barometer. Across the station, shields strengthened. The external storm's fury was muted to a rumble. Atmospheric collapse was averted. The station was saved. But the woman who emerged from the neural chair was not the one who entered. She was Ava, Climate Weaver. And she was also Kalen, the first Weaver. A living, breathing archive of two souls who loved the sky. She no longer needed the projected memories of Earth. She now held the living memory of the man who had cherished them. Her weather compositions changed. They had a new depth, a subtle history. The rains held a memory of care. The winds, a whisper of perseverance. Barometer observed the change. The atmospheric parameters were within spec, but the qualitative data was new. Ava smiled. It was not just data. It was experience. The weather remembered now. And so did she. The high stakes had been oblivion versus inheritance. Would they lose everything, or could they bear the weight of a second life? Ava chose inheritance. And in doing so, she didn't just restore a system. She created a new tradition, a lineage of memory. Sarah Station became known for its uniquely gentle, mindful climate, a place where the air itself felt thoughtful, even kind. And Ava, the living archive, would sometimes stand at the viewport, feeling not two sets of memories, but one rich, singular history. The storm outside was no longer a threat, but a companion in the long, patient dance of sky.